Look, I don't know what kind of equal opportunity initiative sent a 110-pound librarian to my course, but she won't last the first day. This is the crucible, not a book club, the crowd of hardened operators, a sea of granite jaws and corded necks, chuckled nervously. They stood on the edge of the most unforgiving training ground in the Western Hemisphere, a place that broke men for sport, and Sergeant Major Thorne was its undisputed king. His voice, a rasp of crushed gravel and distilled authority, echoed across the dusty assembly area. The woman he was pointing at, Specialist Alara Vance, offered no reaction. She didn't flinch, her gaze didn't waver, her shoulders didn't slump. She was meticulously checking the tension on a strap of her nondescript rucksack, her movements economical and precise, as if the loudest man in the world wasn't currently dissecting her very presence. But when the four-star general up on the observation deck lowered his binoculars, a flicker of something ancient and knowing in his eyes, he saw not the woman, but the way her feet were planted, a subtle, almost imperceptible weight distribution he hadn't seen in 30 years. If you believe that true competence needs no announcement, type silence below. The air at Fort Bragg's infamous Area J, affectionately and fearfully known as the Crucible, tasted of pine, dust, and failure. It was a sprawling, primordial expanse of dense forest, treacherous swamps, and rolling hills designed by nature and enhanced by man to find the absolute limit of a soldier and then push them a mile past it. For 3 weeks, this was the kingdom of Sergeant Major Adrian Thorne, a man carved from the very rock of the Crucible itself. Thorne was a legend in the tracking community. He had written the book, literally. His manual on tactical tracking and counter-tracking was the Bible for every special operations unit in the Allied forces. He saw the world in terms of sign, spore, and disturbance. To him, the wilderness was a manuscript, and he was its most fluent reader. Every soldier who passed through his advanced tracking and evasion course was either forged into a weapon or shattered into a cautionary tale. There were no in-betweens. This year's class was his most elite yet. Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Marine Raiders, Delta operators, the best of the best, sent here to be humbled and rebuilt by the master. And among them, an anomaly. Specialist Alara Vance. She was an administrative clerk attached to a signals intelligence unit, or so her paperwork said. She had been volunteered, or rather, assigned to the course by some high-level command decision that Thorne found deeply insulting. She stood a full head shorter than the smallest man there, with a lean build that seemed more suited to a marathon runner than a soldier designed to carry 100 pounds of gear through hell. Her face was unremarkable, pleasant but forgettable, and her eyes, though clear, held a placid stillness that Thorne misinterpreted as vacant disinterest. He saw weakness. He saw a box-ticking exercise, a political statement that diluted the purity of his life's work. His contempt was not just personal, it was theological. The Crucible had a spirit, a demanding god of competence, and this offering was an insult. He paced before the assembled operators, his boots crunching on the gravel with the rhythmic finality of a judge's gavel. In this place, your reputation does not matter. Your medals do not matter. Your war stories do not matter. His gaze swept over them, pausing for a theatrical moment on Vance. What matters is what you leave behind. A footprint, a broken branch, a sweat stain on a leaf. I will find it. My instructors will find it. We will hunt you. We will run you to ground. And we will expose every weakness you have. He pointed a thick finger toward the vast, menacing tree-line. Out there, you're either the hunter or the hunted. There is no third option. Vance, finished with her pack, was now examining the laces of her standard-issue boots. She wasn't ignoring him. It was something deeper, something more profound. She was simply operating on a different plane of existence, one where his booming voice was just ambient noise, like the wind in the pines. Her focus was absolute, directed inward and downward, to the point of contact between herself and the earth. One of the SEALs, a mountain of a man named Cutter, whispered to his teammate, "She's going to get eaten alive." His friend nodded, a grim certainty on his face. They felt a strange mix of pity and annoyance. Her inevitable and rapid failure would be a distraction, a drain on the course's resources. Thorn, having finished his sermon of intimidation, walked directly to Vance, stopping so close that his shadow enveloped her. "Specialist," he barked, the word dripping with sarcastic formality. "Do you have anything to contribute? Any last words before we release the hounds?" She looked up, her gaze meeting his for the first time. Her eyes were a calm, neutral gray, like a morning fog over a still lake. There was no fear in them, no defiance. There was nothing. It was this nothingness that infuriated Thorn the most. "No, Sergeant Major," she said. Her voice was soft, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was a statement of fact. She had nothing to add, and with that, she shouldered her pack, the movement a single, fluid motion, and turned to face the forest. She was ready. Thorn scoffed, turning to the rest of the class. "You see that? That is the arrogance of the ignorant. That is the calm of the sheep before the slaughter. Do not be that sheep." But the general, Marcus Sterling, watching from the distant deck, saw something else entirely. He saw the way she settled the pack not on her shoulders, but into her center of gravity. He saw the slight cant of her head as she tasted the wind. He saw the ghost of a technique, a philosophy of movement he thought had died out, buried in a classified file so deep it was practically a myth. He had seen it only once before, in the shadowy jungles of a forgotten war, practiced by a man who could walk on leaves and leave no trace, a man they called a ghost long before he became one. The general leaned forward, a cold dread mixing with an electric thrill. He wasn't watching a sheep. He was watching the return of a legend. He just hoped Thorn figured it out before his entire world came crashing down around him. The second day of the exercise began with a torrent of freezing rain, a gift from the heavens that Thorn welcomed with a predatory grin. Bad weather was a force multiplier for the hunter and a nightmare for the hunted. It washed away sign, chilled the body, and broke the spirit. He stood in the command and control tent, a sprawling canvas structure humming with the electronic glow of dozens of monitors displaying thermal feeds, drone overviews, and GPS trackers for his hunter teams. The atmosphere was thick with the smell of wet canvas, hot coffee, and professional confidence. Every operator in the class had a small, encrypted GPS transponder attached to their gear, a safety measure that also served as a tool of ultimate judgment. All but one of them were visible on the main tactical map, blinking green icons moving slowly, desperately, through the unforgiving terrain. 23 elite soldiers scattered and running. But one icon was missing. Vance's transponder had gone dark exactly 6 hours after the exercise began. She cut it off, or it's broken. One of the instructors, a seasoned ranger named Diaz, said, pointing to her last known position on the map. It was a ridiculously exposed spot, a small clearing near a shallow creek. Amateur hour. She probably panicked when the storm rolled in and ditched her primary pack. Thorn nodded, a grim satisfaction settling in. This was the predictable arc of the unprepared. First, a burst of adrenaline-fueled energy. Then, the slow grind of reality. Then, the critical mistake born of fear and exhaustion. "She's walking blind," Thorn declared to the room. "Lost, cold, and scared. She's hunkered down somewhere within a 2-click radius of that creek bed. She's trying to wait out the storm, thinking it'll hide her. She doesn't realize it's my greatest weapon." He began issuing orders with the sharp, confident precision of a master conductor. "Team Alpha, you're on point. Sweep north from the creek. Look for a rookie bivouac, too much disturbed ground, a shelter that's too big, too obvious. Team Bravo, take the south bank. She'll be drawn to the water, but won't know how to use it to cover her trail. I want eyes on every game trail, every overhang, every thicket." Move the teams comprised of Thorn's own instructors, men who could track a whisper on the wind, acknowledged and melted into the downpour. For the rest of the day, the command tent was a hive of quiet, focused activity. Reports crackled over the radio, all with the same frustrating message. Negative contact, no sign, command area is clear. Thorn's confidence began to curdle into annoyance. He berated his teams over the comms. "Widen your senses. You're looking for a soldier, not a ghost." She has to eat. She has to sleep. She has to leave a trace. She is made of matter. She exists. Now find her. As dusk fell, casting long, distorted shadows across the rain-slicked forest, the first of the other evaders began to be caught. A marine raider, exhausted and hypothermic, was found huddled in a poorly constructed lean-to. Two Green Berets were tracked to a cave, their trail a veritable highway of broken ferns and clumsy footprints. Each capture was a small victory, a validation of Thorne's methods, but they felt hollow. The primary target, the one he had publicly marked for failure, remained utterly absent from the narrative. The night brought no relief. Thermal drones, their sophisticated sensors able to detect the body heat of a field mouse from 1,000 feet, scanned the sector around the creek. They found deer, raccoons, a stray coyote. They found nothing human. Canine units, German shepherds with noses so sensitive they could smell a man's fear, were brought to Vance's last known position. They cast about, whined in confusion, and sat down, unable to acquire a scent. It was as if she had simply been lifted from the earth by an unseen hand. Thorne's annoyance festered into a cold, gnawing anger. He stared at the map, at the single, static, mocking red X that marked her last known point. He had built his entire identity, his legendary career, on a single, immutable principle. Everyone leaves a trace. It was a law of nature, as fundamental as gravity. And this slip of a woman, this administrative clerk, was defying it. He was no longer just running an exercise. He was being challenged on a level he had never experienced. His reputation, his philosophy, his very understanding of the world was being tested by an empty space on a map. "Sir," Diaz said, his voice hesitant. Maybe the transponder failure was a gear malfunction, and she got into real trouble. Injured, maybe? Thorne slammed his hand down on the map table, making the monitors jump. "No," he roared, his voice raw with a frustration that was bleeding into something close to obsession. "That's the easy answer. That's the excuse. She's out there. She's mocking us. She thinks this is a game." He grabbed his own pack, his face a mask of grim determination. "I'm going out myself. Team Charlie, with me. We're going to the source. I'll find her trail if I have to get on my hands and knees and taste the damn mud." The other instructors exchanged worried glances. The master was descending from his throne. The god of the Crucible was entering the field of play. This was no longer about training. It had become a personal crusade. And as Thorne stepped out into the relentless, driving rain, he failed to notice the subtle shift in the atmosphere within the tent. The quiet confidence of his hunter teams had been replaced by a growing sense of unease, a creeping respect for the void on their screens. They were hunting something that didn't play by the rules, something that didn't seem to exist. They were hunting a phantom. By the dawn of the fourth day, the legend of the ghost of Area J was no longer confined to the command tent. It had spread like a virus through the hunter teams in the field, whispered over encrypted comms during the lonely, rain-soaked nights. They had now captured 20 of the 24 evaders. The remaining 3 were seasoned veterans, masters of the craft in their own right, and their trails were faint, clever, and difficult to follow. But they were trails. They were tangible. They were human. Specialist Vance, however, remained a complete and total enigma. It had been 72 hours since her transponder went dark. In that time, 36 of the world's most elite trackers, equipped with the most advanced technology available, had scoured every inch of a 50-square-kilometer patch of wilderness. The sum total of their findings was nothing. Not a footprint, not a broken twig, not a discarded wrapper, not a single fiber of clothing, not one heat signature, not one scent for the dogs to follow. It was a perfect, pristine, impossible absence. Sergeant Major Thorne, who had been in the field for 36 straight hours, was a changed man. The arrogant, confident master had been stripped away, leaving a raw, haggard obsession. His eyes were bloodshot, sunk deep into their sockets. Mud caked his face and uniform. He hadn't slept, fueled only by black coffee and a burning, visceral need to solve the puzzle that was consuming him. He was on his hands and knees at the edge of the creek, the very spot where her signal had vanished, running the damp soil through his fingers for the 100th time. "It's impossible," he muttered to himself, the words a desperate prayer. "It's a violation of physics." Diaz stood over him, holding a thermal scanner. "Sir, we've swept this grid 6 times. The general is on his way out. He wants a situation report." Thorne staggered to his feet, his face a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. "The situation is we are hunting a ghost. The situation is a 110-pound clerk has made a mockery of my life's work. You tell the general. You tell him I will not stop until I have her head on a platter." But his voice lacked its earlier conviction. It was brittle, frayed at the edges. The entire exercise had ground to a halt, reoriented around this single, infuriating mystery. The other evaders, wherever they were all but forgotten. The sole mission was now find Vance. The psychological effect on the hunter teams was profound. Their initial confidence had evaporated, replaced by a superstitious awe. They started seeing signs where there were none, jumping at shadows, attributing the rustle of leaves to a ghost they could not comprehend. They spoke of her in hushed tones, calling her the Phantom. The name stuck. It was a title born of equal parts frustration and respect. Back in the CNC tent, the atmosphere was funereal. The tactical map, once a dynamic display of pursuit and evasion, was now a static monument to their failure. Just a collection of captured icons, 3 runners, and one massive, empty space that seemed to mock them. It was into this tense, defeated atmosphere that General Marcus Sterling walked, his presence immediately sucking the remaining air out of the tent. He wasn't in combat fatigues, but in his formal class A uniform, the constellation of stars on his shoulders and the vibrant ribbon rack on his chest a stark reminder of a different world of order and consequence. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that belied his age, his eyes taking in the entire scene in a single, sweeping glance. He looked at the exhausted faces of the instructors, the untouched trays of food, the overflowing coffee pot, and the vast, empty quadrant on the main screen. He didn't need a report. The situation was written on the walls. He walked to the map and stared at the red X marking Vance's last known position. He stood there for a full minute, silent and still. The only sound was the hum of the electronics and the distant drumming of the rain. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and low, yet it cut through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "Sergeant Major Thorne is in the field. I take it?" Diaz, the senior instructor present, snapped to attention. "Yes, General. He's been leading the search personally." Sterling nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "He's looking in the wrong place," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "He's looking for a person. He should be looking for a pattern." He turned to the communications technician. "Son, I need you to pull up the satellite imagery archives for this sector. Specifically, I want the multispectral feed from 1800 hours on day 1. Just as this storm was rolling in, the technician, a young corporal, fumbled with his keyboard, intimidated by the direct address from a 4-star general. "Sir, the cloud cover is almost total. You won't see anything, just do it, Corporal," Sterling said, his voice gentle but firm. An image appeared on the main screen, a swirling mass of gray and white clouds. As instructed, the corporal began cycling through different spectral filters: thermal, infrared, synthetic aperture radar. The images were grainy, indistinct messes. "There," Sterling said suddenly, pointing to a small, almost imperceptible distortion in the corner of the infrared image. "Zoom in on that. Enhance it." The corporal complied, and a pixelated, blurry section of the forest floor filled the screen. It looked like nothing, just a random collection of slightly warmer and cooler spots. "I don't see anything, sir," Diaz said, squinting at the screen. Sterling walked closer, his gaze intense. "Most people wouldn't. You're all looking for a human trail. Broken branches, footprints, the things Thorne taught you. You're looking for the evidence of a body moving through space." He tapped the screen. "She didn't move through it. She moved with it. Look at the water flow patterns off that ridge. See how the rain is pooling? It's unnatural. It's being subtly diverted, channeled. It's an old technique, something they called watershed mimicry. The idea is not to hide your trail, but to make your trail look like the work of nature itself. A stunned silence fell over the room. They were staring at the screen, trying to see what he saw, trying to comprehend the sheer, mind-altering brilliance of it. They had been searching for a needle in a haystack when they should have been looking for a single straw that was behaving like a needle. "Pull up her personnel file," Sterling commanded, his voice now hard as iron. The real one, the legend of the Phantom, was about to be given a name. The corporal's fingers flew across a different keyboard, one connected to a secure, encrypted network. He typed in General Sterling's credentials, then Specialist Vance's service number. The initial file that appeared was the one they had all seen. Alara Vance, Administrative Specialist. Basic qualifications. No commendations of note. A clean but unremarkable record. It was a digital ghost, a cover so thin it was an insult designed to be overlooked. "That's a shell file, son," Sterling said, his voice low and resonant. "Use my override command. Authorization Sierra Omega 90. Access file Talon 7. The corporal's eyes widened. He had heard whispers of the Talon designation, but it was the kind of rumor you didn't repeat, a boogeyman story senior NCOs told to scare new intelligence analysts. It was a level of classification so high it officially didn't exist. He typed in the command. For a moment, the screen went blank. Then, new text began to populate the fields, stark white against a blood-red background, indicating a classification level far beyond top secret. The room held its collective breath. A series of staccato revelations filled the screen, each one landing like a physical blow. The narrator's voice in their heads was slow, deliberate, and filled with a terrible awe. Unit, Special Activities Division, Clandestine Operations Group. Project Designation, AETHR. Operator Call Sign, Phantom. Status, Active Legend. Mission History, Redacted, 48 entries. Skill Set, Deep Infiltration, Non-Permissive Environment Survival, Counter-Surveillance, Asymmetric Warfare, Ghosting Protocols Level V, Medals and Commendations. Distinguished Service Cross for actions in Redacted. Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters for gallantry during operation, Redacted. Intelligence Star for single-handedly compromising the Redacted network. Notes. Subject is the sole surviving graduate of the Talon program, a developmental initiative to create an operator capable of complete non-detection by any known technical or human means. Subject is not to be considered a conventional soldier. She is a strategic asset trained to mimic and exploit natural environmental patterns. She does not evade, she assimilates. Final assessment. Subject ability to remain undetected is considered absolute. Do not attempt to track. In a crisis, do not attempt to rescue. Assume she is the crisis. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the command tent. The instructors, the technicians, the hardened operators stared at the screen, their minds struggling to reconcile the unassuming woman from the assembly area with the terrifying resume glowing before them. The librarian, the book club member, the 110-pound clerk. It was all a lie, a perfect piece of camouflage more effective than any ghillie suit. She wasn't just an elite soldier. She was an entirely different species of one. General Sterling turned away from the screen to face the stunned men. His face was grim, etched with the weight of old secrets. 30 years ago, he began, his voice filling the void, we had a problem. Our best people, our most elite operators, were getting tracked and caught behind enemy lines. The technology was getting too good. Thermal imagers, satellite surveillance, acoustic sensors, the human element was becoming a liability. So, a program was created. A deeply classified, morally ambiguous program called Talon. Its purpose was not to create better soldiers, but to create something that wasn't a soldier at all. Something that could shed its humanity and become a part of the landscape. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. They took a handful of candidates, orphans with no connections, prodigies in observation and pattern recognition. They didn't train them in combat. They trained them in biology, geology, meteorology, and psychology. They taught them to think like the wind, to move like the water, to hide like a shadow. They taught them to erase their own presence from the world. Most of the candidates washed out or broke psychologically. The program was deemed a failure, too costly, too extreme. It was shut down and buried. His gaze swept across the faces in the room. They thought it produced nothing. But it produced one. It produced her. We sent her after terror cells in impossible terrain. We sent her to places where satellites couldn't see and drones couldn't fly. She became a ghost story whispered by our enemies, a phantom that walked through their camps unseen and unheard, leaving nothing behind but intelligence that won us wars. Just then, the tent flap flew open and Sergeant Major Thorne stumbled in, his face pale with exhaustion and disbelief. "Sir," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "We found something. Not a trail. A message." He held up a single, perfect maple leaf. In its center, 3 tiny, precise holes had been pricked with a pine needle. They formed a simple, 3-letter acronym known to every soldier in the room. EOM, end of mission. Sterling took the leaf, a faint, sad smile touching his lips. "She's telling us she's done," he said softly. "The exercise is over. She won." He then looked directly at Thorne, his eyes holding no anger, only a profound, weary authority. "Sergeant Major, you are the best tactical tracker in the world. You hunt men, but you spent the last 4 days trying to hunt a force of nature. Your mistake wasn't in your skill. It was in your assumption. You assumed you knew what you were looking at." Sterling then did something that sent a shockwave through the entire command structure. He turned toward the empty wilderness, stood ramrod straight, and rendered a slow, perfect salute. It wasn't a salute to a specialist. It was a salute to a legend. It was a gesture of profound, unequivocal respect. The mystery of the phantom was solved, but the legend was just beginning. The story of what happened in the crucible during those 4 days of relentless rain became the single most enduring piece of folklore in the special operations community. It spread not like wildfire, but like smoke, insidiously, quietly, seeping into every corner of that closed and guarded world. It was told in hushed tones in the back of C-130s flying over hostile territory, whispered in the chow halls of forward operating bases in Afghanistan, and debated over beers in the dusty bars outside Fort Bragg. The details became mythic, embellished with each telling. Some said she never touched the ground at all, moving through the canopy like a primate. Others claimed she could control the rain, that she hypnotized the tracking dogs, that she could literally render herself invisible. The truth, as is often the case, was far more terrifying and impressive. She had simply used a level of skill, patience, and environmental attunement so far beyond their comprehension that it might as well have been magic. The official after-action report for the exercise was a document of beautiful simplicity. It was a single page. It contained Specialist Ilara Vance's shell file photograph, the unremarkable face of the administrative clerk, and beneath it, a single sentence typed by General Marcus Sterling himself. Subject demonstrated a level of professional competence that exceeds this institution's capacity for evaluation. All objectives met. No further analysis required. That page was framed and hung not in a hall of fame, but in Sergeant Major Thorne's private office, a constant, humbling reminder directly in his line of sight. Thorne himself underwent a profound transformation. The event didn't just break his arrogance. It shattered the very foundations of his expertise. He had dedicated his life to a craft, only to discover a level of mastery he never knew existed. For a week, he locked himself in his office, refusing to speak to anyone. He reread his own manuals, the hallowed texts he had written, and saw them for what they were: brilliant, comprehensive, and utterly incomplete. They were books about hunting men, and he had come face to face with something more. He emerged a different man. The booming, sarcastic tyrant was gone, replaced by a quieter, more thoughtful, and infinitely more dangerous instructor. His ego had been sacrificed in the crucible, and in its place, a deep and abiding humility had been forged. He sought out Ilara Vance 2 weeks later. He found her not in some high-tech command center, but in the base library, quietly reading a book on soil erosion. She wore a simple physical training uniform, looking more like a college student than a living weapon. Thorne stood before her, his massive frame seeming to shrink in the quiet, scholarly atmosphere. He didn't salute. He didn't use her rank. He simply stood there until she looked up, her calm gray eyes showing no surprise. "Al," was the only word he could manage. It was a question that contained the weight of his entire world. She didn't give him a secret or a technique. She simply tapped the book she was reading. "You teach your men to look at the ground, Sergeant Major. You taught them to find the things that are out of place." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the window, to the trees beyond. "I learned to see the place itself. The ground, the trees, the water, the wind, they are not obstacles. They are allies. They have a language. If you are quiet enough, you can hear it. If you are humble enough, they will hide you." She then gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You were too loud. Your mind, your boots, your assumptions. The forest heard you coming from a mile away." It was the most profound lesson of his life. Thorne took that lesson and rebuilt his entire doctrine around it. His new course was no longer just about tracking. It was about awareness, about humility, about understanding the environment not as a battlefield, but as a complex system to be respected. He called the first lecture of every news cycle the Phantom's Doctrine. He would stand before the new class of elite operators, point to a picture of the most unassuming woman they had ever seen, and tell them the story of how she had single-handedly defeated his entire institution, not with strength, but with silence. The legend grew. The spot where her signal disappeared became an unofficial landmark on training maps, known only as Vance's drop, a specific, elegant knot she had used to tie down a piece of equipment, found on a review of her initial gear check, became known as the Phantom Hitch, a knot that could be undone with a single touch, leaving no trace it was ever there. These are the artifacts of her legacy, small ripples from a single, quiet stone dropped into a very large pond. Alara Vance herself disappeared back into the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the military. Her name was removed from future course rosters. She was once again a ghost in the machine. But her lesson, the ghost of her presence, now haunted the Crucible in the best possible way, reminding every arrogant operator who walked its grounds that true mastery is not about the noise you make, but about the silence you can command. Years passed. The world turned. Wars shifted from deserts of sand to deserts of information, but the fundamental truths of the soldier remained. At Fort Bragg, the Advanced Tracking and Evasion course was still the most respected and feared school of its kind, but its spirit had fundamentally changed. The instructors, many of them trained in the post-Vance era by Sergeant Major Thorne, taught a new philosophy. They taught what they called environmental empathy. They taught operators to listen more than they moved, to observe more than they acted. The primary lesson was no longer about dominance over nature, but harmony with it. The results were undeniable. The success rate of special operations missions in complex, non-permissive environments saw a marked increase. Operators were evading capture at a higher rate, conducting surveillance with greater stealth, and showing a deeper, more intuitive understanding of their operational areas. They were quieter, more patient, more effective. They were all, in their own small way, chasing the ghost of the Phantom. Sergeant Major Thorne eventually retired, but his final act before leaving the service was to permanently install a new introductory lesson into the course curriculum. It was a case study devoid of names and classified details, titled "The Assumption of Incompetence." It detailed, in painfully honest prose, how a team of experts, blinded by prejudice and arrogance, failed to identify a superior threat right in front of them. It was a masterclass in cognitive bias, a lesson in humility written by the man who had learned it the hard way. The story of Alara Vance became a foundational myth, a teaching tool for every new generation of warrior. It served as a powerful reminder that looks are deceiving, that silence can be a weapon, and that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you notice least. The legend ensured that no instructor, no operator, would ever again make the same mistake Thorne did. They learned to see past the surface, to look for the quiet competence that lay beneath. And what of Alara Vance? Her official file was sealed and archived in a digital vault so deep it would require an act of Congress to open it. She never received a public medal for what she did in the Crucible. Her victory was too quiet, too subtle for a parade. Her reward was not a plaque on a wall, but something far more valuable: the continued success and survival of the soldiers who learned from her example. Her legacy wasn't a statue in a courtyard. It was the whispered story of the Phantom, a story that inspired excellence through humility. It was the quiet professional who continued to move through the shadows of the world, a ghost in the machine, a force of nature disguised as a woman, ensuring that the work got done without any need for applause. She was the living embodiment of the creed that actions speak louder than words, that respect is earned in the silence between heartbeats, in the perfect execution of a task no one will ever know you completed. Her influence persisted not because of who she was, but because of the principle she represented, that true strength, enduring strength, requires no validation. It is proven not in the boast, but in the deed. It is forged in silence and demonstrated with calm, undeniable, and devastating competence. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where silent professionalism defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.